I think it's more interesting of a question to ask what will stay the same about work as opposed to what will change about work. And I think that question is interesting because it allows a person to really optimize their allocation of time. We should be focusing our time on the things that we feel confident will stay the same. We should also be prioritizing agency within our own time. And so time is the only real resource that is scarce.
Hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day.
Well, welcome once again to another Work Ethic podcast. And I am sitting here today with Adam Mangana, who I recently had a chance to connect with through a mutual friend. He is executive director of Optima Classical Academy, and also, I believe, a co-host of a podcast himself, Ready Teacher One, with a mutual brother and friend that actually is how we met, that introduced us, our buddy Ryan McLaughlin. I tell you what, man, I'm gonna just toss it to you to kind of flesh out your own kind of introduction. Just tell everybody kind of about yourself.
John, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be on the podcast, inspired by the incredible work you're doing. And
thank you, man.
You know, man, really what I'm driven by is the opportunity to give children all over the world a world-class education. You know, I after my time at Brown University, studying the classics, I had a chance, like LeBron, to take my talents to South Beach. I was in Teach for America, and I was introduced to the challenges of the public school system. And I've been spending the last 20 years of my career trying to figure out how do we give a world-class education to every child? And it's taken me on an incredible journey across 4 states. But we are building the world's first virtual reality school, because we want this school to be accessible. So it needs to be online. And we are building a classical curriculum, which is a time-tested curriculum of the great books, the 7 liberal arts and the Socratic method, a curriculum that has been just really life-changing for so many. And we're trying to figure out ways to make it more accessible to more kids. And we can't build classical schools quickly enough. You know, and so the way that we imagine being able to get this to folks is through these virtual reality headsets that I'm holding up here in the Zoom.
I just got my own after we spoke. I went and got it like 2 days later. I was inspired. I still got to say though, and maybe this is for maybe not another time, but I'm not sure what to do in it. So I go in, I'm like, oh, this is cool. It was very cool for a minute, like play this game, do this thing. I'm like, oh, this is very cool. And yet I go, I need this to be a productivity. I need this to be like personally, I'm like, oh, I've never have, nor will I be playing games beyond like just, oh, that's cool. All right, I'm done. And anyway, but I just got the headset, and just in terms of the obvious potential of it, blown away. And I actually think, as I think about adoption of this stuff, just education and working with children in this space, and it's such an obvious tool for I mean, God, like every single moment can be a field trip, basically. It can be like actual kind of what do they call that, like immersive experience. And I'm like, it's a no-brainer that it's a wonderful and productive education tool. Like that's no game. And yet at the same time, but then like me as a grown man, I'm like, I don't know what the hell to do with this thing yet.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. So that's where they take in those headsets. Go on, man. Sorry to interrupt, but
no. This is, you know, you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur. You know that there is, you know, one of the ways that we're successful in business is that we have an insight that others may not have, right? Mm-hmm. It's a competitive environment. So I always ask the question of folks like, what do you know to be true that others would disagree with you on? And so the premise of delivering a great books education in virtual reality is like, there are all of these tensions, right? There are these tensions because most classical educators would be very skeptical of technology. And that has its roots all the way back to Socrates. Socrates, if you read Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates was skeptical of books. I love that you have all these books in the background because you're a man after my own heart.
I like
You
books.
know, that books were the first and most important empathy machine that we've ever built in the world. The great books were portals into the lives of some of the best minds that have ever lived, right? And so what makes a book a great book? Well, it's a book we couldn't write ourselves. It's a book that stands the test of time, right? And these are portals into the lives and brains of the best thinkers and the most incredible challenges of humanity for the last 6,000, 7,000 years, you know? So, so I say all that to say, there will be people who are skeptical of virtual reality as a technology, because when they put the headset on, the killer apps right now are games. The very best developers are operating in the gaming space. And that's primarily a function of the business model. Yeah. You can build a game once, sell it 1,000 times, right? So that's what's driving the adoption is the gaming space. I've never actually used virtual reality as a game. We've built a lot of virtual reality experiences, but it's always been an educational tool. And my thesis was that if we could have kids, you know, engage with the material. So I would tell the teachers that I've trained in the past and the instructional designers that I've worked with, focus is the new IQ. And I borrow that from my good friend Cal Newport, who wrote a book called Deep Work, where he talks about this idea of focus as the new IQ. And so if you think about Zoom school, right, you have 25 different, what we call the checkerboard of faces. And the teacher's trying to control 25 different students' homes. And they've got TikTok going, they've got fake screens in the background, they've got dogs barking, and it's just a zoo. It's just a disaster. And if you're going to have more than a small group, more than a one-on-one, it's a much better idea to have an experience completely immersed in one singular virtual classroom as opposed to 25 checkerboard of faces at which the teacher is the center. And so we can really adopt, you know, and make a shift to a model where kids can optimize that relationship online. I call it the common courtesy of connection. When we are present together, when we're present in the same space, I can read your body language, right? I can be communicated with in these kind of unspokens. Teachers can use proximity. So a lot of the things that were missing during crisis school, during pandemic school, a lot of those elements that were missing are back, right? Those relationships that are critical to actually getting students to buy into the learning process. Those things are back at the center. So that's what we're excited about building. I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised that we're the first online school that's using virtual reality. We certainly are not, you know, we're not impressed with the fact that we're first. We want to be the best. So the best online school we think is classical, and the best online school we think is delivered in virtual reality for the reasons that I've just framed.
Man, I'm in love with it. So let me, you know, you were talking about like having, was it Teach for America and kind of having an opportunity. And you said I was introduced to the challenges of the public school system. And, you know, you did say like the great books and liberal arts and Socratic method as like a, let's say a definition maybe of what you mean by classical. But I would actually like to, for those listening that go, well, I've read some great books. Like, what are we talking about? Like, can you just talk about classical education a little bit and maybe do that in what I assume, and it's maybe a bit of an assumption, but I assume most of the people that I know that are listening probably have a public school education at elementary level. I would say the lion's share of people that I'm aware of that are listening would be public school, and just use those to like compare and contrast and like help us better understand what that even is.
Yeah. So that's a tremendous question. I really appreciate the opportunity to frame this. So classical education is really the education that folks had for many, many millennia. It was, if you were a child of the West, the Western civilization, you were going to be influenced by Egypt, by Greece, by Rome. You were going to be influenced by the stories of the great thinkers, the heroes of those eras. And so for a long time, if you were educated in the West, you learned Latin and you learned ancient Greek. And so what happened in our country that changed that? Well, after the Civil War, we had an industrial revolution in our country that led to the need for factory workers. And you had innovators like Francis Parker and John Dewey, who partnered with the magnates of the time, folks like Carnegie. That's why we have Carnegie units when we count the time of the students' butts in a seat. And they devised a plan to scale education to the masses. But it was really focused on democratizing immigrants and preparing them for factory life. And so it was an educational model that was focused on maximizing utility. How do you go to school and get these skills and go get a job, right? Classical education turns that idea on its head. It's about life of the mind. Liberal arts is about, reading deeply, writing deeply, and asking great questions. And so when parents were put in a situation where they had to look at the content on a two-dimensional screen of what their child was getting, everyone went to Zoom school over the course of the pandemic, they began to question, well, what is the content that my child is getting? And so classical education is a content-rich education that is focused on human potential rather than the maximization of human utility. You are not getting a classical education to get a job. But the irony is that it is probably the most future-proof education you can have, because you're taught how to think rather than what to think. Right? So, when you're exposed to the great thinkers, you have this saying, there's nothing new under the sun, or that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Really understanding history in a way that you can access to be able to solve the problems of today. The progressive model would be a model that would say, can we build it? And the classical model would be a model that would say, should we build it? Right? So there's an ethical and moral component to it. At the end of the day, if we teach civic virtue, that's really what we're driving at with classical education. We believe that education should be something that adds to the collective morality of our society.
All right. So this may or may not be a great question to fall on the heels of it, but it's what prompted in my mind, and we're just going to roll with this because this is just how I think, right?
Bring it.
So I mean, I know you guys heavily rely on Socrates, and I think that's probably a great place to kick off this question, maybe. The kind of Hellenized philosophical framework that emerged of, let's say, like the dualism between kind of the physical world and, let's say, the world of ideas or the soul, right? And when you said, well, not how to think, but what to think, not can we build it, but should we build it, and the idea of the ethical framework, and I go, my mind immediately went metaphysics, and then I went, okay, so, I'm just gonna flesh this out for those listening, for me a little bit too. Like, so I've thought about this a lot in terms of just looking at our own culture and what's going on. I go, okay, so in that time, so Plato, this is like a great, Socrates, through the pen of Plato, I guess, would say, like, my soul is imprisoned in my body. And there was like this hyper valuation of the spiritual, the ethical, the metaphysical. and kind of a degradation of the physical. And actually, I think this maps to a lot of like things I see in like churches and things like that, where I'm like, we're saving souls, but be damned if you're going hungry or whatever. And I go, okay, well, that's problematic, right? And then in the kind of Enlightenment, you had like a pendulum swing that didn't like undo this dualism, but actually said, I care about what can be measured, weighed, like it's concrete, it's right in front of us. And that all that spiritual stuff, like, you know, that the world of gods and genies and mythology, like to hell with all that actually became devalued substantially. And then we propped up the concrete, the sciences, right? Newton and it's just like this. Okay, this became really important. And that begins what I guess is called like modernity, right? And then of course, as time goes on, we like come into like this post-modernity that deals a little bit with just like, is anything true or what, you know, like this bigger question that emerges. But like there's this in the pendulum swing. The reason that all came to mind was I actually thought, can we do it? And should we do it? Like we can weaponize a virus, but should we? We can build bombs, but should we? And actually it's like there, you know, maybe we can create like human hybrid, like maybe we can mix humans and animal DNA. Like there's all kinds of stuff maybe we could do. It actually seems like we definitely could do these things. And now there are like laws in place and things, and those are kind of our ethical framework, but they're like these boundaries that are put in place by something like legislated ethics or frameworks of systems that are in place to kind of like keep us in line or within certain lanes. And I guess I wanted to bring all that up because I actually think that dialogue between the ethical and the physical and the like that, as you just said, can we do it and should we do it? Really like highlighted to me this idea of like how to think and you know, going back to like, well, we needed workers in the factories. It actually wouldn't be in our best interest if they can think. Right? Like I actually just need you to pull this lever around the clock and then go home and take your little paycheck. And actually, if you are able to think critically, if you actually could ask questions of like, are we making things worth making? And are we making them well? Like, is there value being produced here? And I actually think like just why I'm saying this is like, you're going, the thing I hear you saying about what's important in education, I'm like, is actually what's important in like, it's like so revolutionarily important, like at the roots of the issue of everything. I don't even know how to land this as a question, just maybe respond to some of that, because it just all of that came to mind just as how, you know, the actual fundamental question, what we can do or should do.
Yeah. What is school? You know, it comes back to that, right? Like, first of all, your framing of history was excellent, and how we evolved. But you know, school comes from that ancient term schole, which was leisure. And if you think
is that I love this.
Right. So we go back to the idea of what is school? Leisure. Leisure is not about maximizing utility.
Right.
Right. And so we landed in this place, to your point, where if you and I were to transport ourselves to any public school right now, we would see very little leisure. We would see very little joy. We would see quite a bit of stress, operational failure, consternation. And it is not because they are incompetent adults. It's because we have a system that was not built for our current year, our current era, right? But we continue to keep that system alive. And I'm not on your podcast to say why that is the case. I think people have their own opinions about why that is the case. But I'm here to share that there is an inevitability that system is going to have to change, if we're being honest. And I think everyone knows it. But I'm willing to say it out loud, and I'm willing to offer an alternative I think parents I think outsourcing the raising of your child has jumped the shark. I think that ultimately we have 60% of folks working from home now, and we need an educational model that takes that into consideration. We're no longer working on farms. We have this long summer break that's kind of just, a tradition. It's not really intentional. We have this calendar year that is out of touch. We have, just very random school day hours, and just all type of operational hurdles that boil down to the fact that school for most folks is a series of government programs, feeding programs, transportation programs, healthcare, tracking. And so we're not really about life of the mind. We're not really about following one's passion or identifying one's questions or self-actualization. And the way that school began, there was some utility in it. It originates because the Greeks want to, they want to be able to organize militarily, but it very quickly evolves into, as they went into peacetime, into leisure and life of the mind, and really pursuing what is more human. Socrates was intensely interested in what made us human. Yeah. And I think we're getting to that place where schools should be more connected to human flourishing rather than human optimization of labor. Right. So I think at the end of the day, everyone knows that we need a change, and very few of us are willing to try to put an artifact out into the space that represents change.
Well, and it's really interesting, because I assume, and you can respond to this, but I assume you were working on this before COVID hit, right? And your track record here goes a little further back. And before I knew what you were doing, before I met you, or was told about what you were doing, so my wife was, and I'm so happy to say was, I mean, last time we spoke, just not even a few weeks ago, she's been in the Hillsborough County public school systems as she was a student nutrition manager. She was like head lunch lady at an elementary school, Title I elementary school here. She was probably the smartest lunch lady on the planet. She actually still is a lunch lady. She just went to not the public school system right now. And I'm super grateful that she did that. But I would hear, like, she's smart, she makes observations, just loves kids, and I hear all these things. And I was like, it's let's say it's, I mean, it's tragic, right? I don't know. Like, the words I have are probably, harsh and whatever, but like, I'm like, man, this is a bad. And even among us, just her and I'm like, if we were to have a kid right now, I just wouldn't let him go to school. Like, I'm like, I don't think it's in a kid's best interest to go to school. Like, and of course Stan's like, well, what is school? What do you mean by school? Whatever. But like, if this is what there is, like, just do something else, whatever, anything else. and I was, so she left that school system. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But what I was trying to get at was, like, when the pandemic hit, I was like filled with hope as they closed. Like, there was something in me, the entrepreneurial impulse was like, now's the time. Like, this thing can crumble, like, it's gonna crumble, but it can be like sped up. And like, when she would talk about stuff in the school system, there's obvious things that there's like adaptations that can be made, that the system doesn't have to be as toxic, as hard, it's like, can be made more human or whatever. But you're right, it's not like, well, there's bad teachers or bad leadership or whatever. It's just like systemic toxicity or something that it's like. So I'd be like, well, this change, and she's like, well, here's a million reasons it can't be done. This change, a million reasons it can't be done. And I'm like, then get out of it. Like, just get out of it. Like, you have to just exit burning buildings, right? Yeah. But something else has to be built. This is what I hate about hearing, like, people like burn it down. And it's like, I mean, I'm filled with that impulse, but I'm like, right, first you have to build something worth coming to when that's burning down, right? We need something to exit to that is not just the wilderness, right? Like that's a necessity. And so I just thought, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? And like, I didn't see much. I still don't see much. And then when I heard about what you guys are doing and saw the work you're doing, I was like, oh man. And I'm just curious. So one, you were working on this before. What kind of an acceleration was this? Like the opportunity that emerged, because you're right. We went to Zoom. You can't go in. You're like, this is our moment, right? And I'm wondering about like the way that the timing all kind of came together, because I'm
Yeah.
like, it's this sounds like a fantastic alternative. And what's that transition looking like? And how is the like pandemic really like, I mean, affected y'all's work?
Yeah. So I've been working in virtual reality for the last 7 years. And I started, I was the coding coach at a independent school I was working at. And I started looking for ways to expand the type of profile of participant in my coding program, because I was looking for ways to engage female students, just a more diverse group of students.
Yeah.
And developing VR applications is much more like creating a film. So you have folks who want to work on lighting, particle effects. You have folks who want to work on the soundtracks. So it was just a broader group that I could appeal to. And I began to build VR labs to do pullout work, and realized that I needed a much bigger network and just resources, and ended up applying to Vanderbilt, doing my master's degree at Vanderbilt, and my capstone project in VR development simultaneously. And this was just a God thing. Met my good friend and partner in crime, Vince Jordan, who was starting a VR company in Mississippi. And we together began to build, pretty substantial labs in person. But when the pandemic hit, tethered headsets to a computer lab where you were going to switch out and everyone was going to share the headset was just a no-no. And so we had to quickly pivot. And because we had had so much experience putting, kids, younger K-12 kids in headsets and really optimizing the technology for learning, because we had had so much practice doing that when the pandemic hit, we were fortunate to be able to pilot with an untethered headset, sending headsets home and running coursework as an alternative to Zoom in a networked together VR platform, what people are now calling a metaverse. And so we could customize the learning environments for that particular experience. And we noticed that the students far preferred interacting in the metaverse over Zoom. And so we began to just create more organization around that, more instructional design around that, and it began to snowball. And as the pandemic has still lingered, and people have focused on remote work, there's been an increase in the number of folks who, like you just said, I'm gonna educate my child from home. I'm gonna be looking for alternatives. I want school choice. I want flexibility. Those things are they're just much more common now. And so that has accelerated the demand for better online education. And up until this point, online education was really designed as almost a correspondence course. It was for autodidacts that would be able to teach themselves material. There was not a lot of robust live synchronous instruction. And so VR really helps for the synchronous component of an online education. We still use asynchronous material, but we're using that asynchronous material in a more traditional LMS. So our complete school experience includes virtual reality as well as an asynchronous LMS. So we have both.
Okay, so I mean, I know what synchronous and asynchronous means, but just to be clear for those listening and even myself, that means synchronous is we're all together in this space at the same time, learning the same thing. And then asynchronous is just like, yeah, it's a lecture. You can watch it whenever you can get to it or something like that.
Or so if you think about the anatomy of curriculum, you have the planned, the delivered, and the received. The planned are the lesson plans. The delivered would be the teacher resource guides, and the received would be the assessments. That all adds up to a teacher who will be delivering, what we would call, in layman's terms, the I do, we do, you do, right? So in any type of intellectual pursuit, you have this kind of structure. I'm teaching you something, I will do it first, right? Monkey see, monkey do. Mm-hmm. Then you and I will do it together. And then I'm going to have you do it without me. And so the we do is synchronous in VR. So let's say students are learning the parts of a plant, right? Mm-hmm. They're identifying the parts of the plant. The teacher might open with a lecture on the parts of the plant, the xylem, the phloem. Here's where they are. And then we would jump into the VR headset together, and each student would be able to label the parts of the plant. And then they would jump out of that headset, and for homework or the assessment or assignment, they would go back into the learning management system, and there'd be an image of a plant from their VR experience, and they would then identify those parts of the plant without the teacher's instruction. So it completes that circle of being able to evaluate, was the VR lesson actually helpful? Did they actually learn something? So we don't want children in headsets for 8 hours a day. We really want to use those headsets and optimize the experience, when they are together with their teacher. So another way of saying it would be synchronous is teacher directed, asynchronous is student or learner directed.
Man, I love this. Let's take a minute and go back for you to back in the day when you're a youngin. Talk to me about your early days. Like and specifically, sticking with the theme of the show. What is your earliest memory of, let's just say, the word work taking on meaning in your life? Like, just tell me what you remember.
Thank you. So I'm from Newport News, Virginia, and for those who know Newport News, its nickname is Bad News. I grew up in a shipyard town, blue collar shipyard town. Most of the folks who graduated from high school with me ended up in the military. So it's a place where the word work ethic is not a word, because everybody's working all the time. So something's wrong with you if you don't work. My mom was a secretary in the physics department of Hampton University. So my mother, who was hugely influential in my development, made sure that most of my intellectual mentors from as young as I can remember were physicists. And so although I appreciated physical labor because of the environment that I was in, what I aspired to, what I wanted, was to be able to go to college, because the folks who were mentoring me were professors in college. So if I didn't work in school, what that meant in my formative years was that I probably would have limited options, and I would probably be doing some type of physical work in the shipyard. So I had a huge incentive to do that. The first time that I remember pushing myself physically beyond what I thought I was capable of, my mom, just because I grew up in the South in a shipyard town, I did things like, build troughs, cut down trees, did a lot of physical labor at the house. But the first time that I could remember being exasperated was, playing high school football. And my high school football coach, Tommy Riemann, who played in the NFL, had built just a powerhouse of a football program. My high school quarterback was Michael Vick. So I played with some serious athletes. 24 of the guys on my high school team all went Division I. And, he used to, Coach Riemann on Mondays used to say, this the butter from the duck day. And, we just those were days where we were just, it was just very, 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 very physical. We would be in the weight room, we'd run miles, we'd do all these kind of things. And he'd have these butter from the duck days. And I remember, that was the first time that I really had to think in terms of working beyond what I thought I could physically do. And it was transformative, because that platform of high school football in the Deep South allowed me access to an Ivy League education. And I got a chance to play football at Brown University. And I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity had I not, been able to, go play for that football program, because he was the one, it wasn't my teachers, it wasn't even my mom. He was the one who encouraged me to play Ivy League football. He was the one who said, you got 8 schools to choose from, pick one of those, and that's where you're going to go. And so I'm appreciative of that. But it's a different, intellectual work is different than physical work. They require different temperaments. And both of them are valuable. There's incredible power in figuring out yourself physically and pushing yourself to the limits physically. And I think too many folks who sit down in offices don't have that opportunity. So I hope that gets at a little bit of the way.
Oh, yeah, it really does. It's, what stands out. It's really interesting to me, like the whole, and I'm picking up on this in a lot of what, as you're talking, I don't know if it's because it's on my mind now with so the body and the mind, the concrete and the ideas, there's something there, but everyone's doing physical work, and just it's interesting that physicist is the life of the mind. Just, it's a good turn of phrase or whatever. But you're I want to work with my mind, and these are different kind of work. And then you're but I remember engaging and pushing myself physically, and that's what gave me opportunity to work intellectually. That somehow ultimately it actually was physical work that led to access to the Ivy League intellectual education work that you wanted to do to begin with.
That's the irony. Yeah. And that's why I think there's all these tensions, right? Pulling at both sides of oneself. The ancients really did value physical, they organized learning because there was a need to organize militarily. And they just understood that to optimize your mind, you had to optimize your body. And so, I think work, the idea of work is mostly mental. The barrier to work can sometimes be physical. What would stop me from this pursuit? What would, I have to keep my health in order, right? So the reason I'm going there is we had a moment 2 years ago where we were scared about everyone's ability to work because a virus came into the country and everything shut down. So I'm going there because there is this tension, because when we couldn't work, we didn't understand our identities anymore. Right. So work and identity are coupled. Right. And so it's just a really interesting, like you said, rabbit hole, because we are more than our work. And I hope that in some of the work that we are doing, that we can get back to an idea that we are human, and being human includes more than just our labor. Being human includes the common courtesy of connection, the relationships that we're forming. And those relationships are super critical to identity formation, in my opinion, not who you are as a laborer. I think, that to me is a transition that we're getting ready to make. Instead of saying, in the first 2 seconds, my name is Adam and this is what I do. I think it's a much more interesting idea to say, my name is Adam and this is who I am.
I think that's exactly right. And I actually have been talking with some folks about, when you ask children, there's almost we say it with the word be, but what do you want to be when you grow up? Like it's framed like some ontological question, but what it's saying
Right.
is it's vocational. It's like, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a rapper. I want to, it's like, it's what do you want to do? And so this really gets to your like work and identity rather than like, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of life do you want to live? And then, so I want to ask you, there's so much in what you just said. I want to try to like pick it apart a little bit because I feel like there's a lot to learn there. But I think to get at that, because as you're talking about work, you're talking about labor, and there's more to our identity than our labor. And I agree. In fact, I think that's like maybe a fundamental thesis of this entire show, right? All these conversations, kind of something I feel is like fundamentally true. And I do think work and identity is deeply tied. And I also think, as you think about like the future of work, like, oh, we had all these people to go to the assembly line, but man, the robots are coming, like we don't need you to check us out. We don't need you to drive these cars. And that was another part of me starting the show. I was like, man, we need to think about what this word means and what our relationship with work is, like what's its place in life and humanity. Like, because if you're unemployed, and I work with a lot of unemployed people, like I work with a lot of unemployed, but like I'm in relationship with and walking with folks that are on the streets and unemployed. I mean, I still think like, yeah, you still need to work. Like, even if no one's hiring, like it's not good for you to not work, to not have things to do, heavy things to lift. And so what I wanted to get at as a question is maybe to ask you to define, like, how would you define work?
Wow. That's a great question. That is a great question. So I think that I get back to this idea of focused effort. And that effort could find its way into being valued in a market, or it could not.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a focused, sustained effort that would be intended to accomplish something, a task, to build something. That's how I would define it. Very simple.
I mean, it's a very good definition. Like, I think it's probably, if we look it up, it's probably exactly the definition. Focused, sustained effort intended to accomplish something. Task. So like, so like when coach had you do the butter from the duck days, that was work, right? Physical, hard work that felt like it was taxing you beyond your capacity, which I think there's something very important about that, where we get into like deep work, meaningful work that puts you into like flow state, almost is like something that is beyond what comes easier, is, boring. And so you worked really hard and it was intended to accomplish something. Some of that might've been psychological, some of that might've been physical. And some of that might've been beyond those two specifics in something more abstract in the game. And I'm curious, like, about the idea. So I've heard people talk about work as it relates like to the future. So it's like, we'll build a house. So like the accomplished thing, it's like, well, it's the focused, sustained effort, or the labor, or the like strain or struggle is oriented toward results that are like later. And then oftentimes, like entrepreneurial work, for example, is often like a lot later, right? Like I've got to muscle through something. And I'm curious, so just with that definition, how does the dynamic of time relate to this definition?
You're hitting the ball. I mean, man, the questions are incredible. So I want to go a couple of directions with this, but I'm trying to be succinct.
We got time.
I think there's a problem in our society in general that we're always trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And I think that problem is that people are predicting things that they're ill-equipped to predict. I think it's more interesting for you to tell me what you think will stay the same in the next 10 years. I think that's a much more interesting question, because, if you said to me, Adam, what about the education business will stay the same, right? We all know that there are many things that are changing in the education business, and most people are staking their flags in what is changing. Even this idea of virtual reality headsets, okay, that's changing. But what will stay the same? The relationships with teacher will stay the same. The great books and the importance of the Enchiridion of Epictetus, or Plato's Phaedrus, or the writings of Catullus or Horace. These will be timeless. These will stay the same. Okay. And I think it's more interesting of a question to ask what will stay the same about work as opposed to what will change about work. And I think that question is interesting because it allows a person to really optimize their allocation of time. We should be focusing our time on the things that we feel confident will stay the same. We should also be prioritizing agency within our own time. And so time is the only real resource that is scarce. People think that's a pretty radical idea, but time is really what we're giving people back in the venture that we're talking about here today. You don't have to get on a bus and commute and have your child be late on a bus. You don't have to, drive anywhere. You can get a world-class education right in your home. You can take your world-class education with you when you travel. I think most people have begun to think about time much more in many more interesting ways as it relates to work. Books like The 4-Hour Workweek have become popularized, which, I'd push back against in some ways. But everyone is looking for ways to optimize their time. And I think that's a good idea. I think optimizing your time is a good idea. But I think one of the hacks to do that is to figure out how to allocate your own mental and emotional resources.
Okay. That is well said. I have to ask the pushback on the 4-hour work week.
I think Tim Ferriss is brilliant. I think he's a super smart guy. I think that the title is clickbait, right? And
it is. In fact, it's technically clickbait. He just ran a ton of ads to see which one people clicked on.
That's right.
I was like, oh, that's the name then.
It is technically clickbait.
Yeah.
So because you and I know that, we also know that even though there are many things that are valuable in the book, at the end of the day, we should be allocating our time, and this is where I agree with him. We should be allocating our time with agency, but we shouldn't, in my view, do work that we're trying to run from. I think we should find ways to fill our weeks with meaningful work. And I think in some ways he and I don't disagree on that.
That's right. You don't. Yeah.
I think that there is a
misunderstanding of,
and it's a little bit misleading. I think that ultimately his message is one of agency.
It's a book about freedom, but it has an economic component, which is
an interesting
limiting the economic production that enables the freedom or whatever, right? Yeah,
that's right. And potentially exploiting folks in other developing countries, and that's playing hiring arbitrage.
That's not untrue. That is not untrue.
So the hiring arbitrage is an interesting idea. The exploitation is a less interesting idea. So,
and as you're talking about this, I mean, it all comes down to whether it's financial, time, energy, focus. It's about investment and choosing where you spend your time, whom you spend your time with, what you pay attention to, what you strain and sweat and bleed for. And at some level, and I wanted to circle back to this on the question of focus, because I actually think you're like the new IQ, I think is how you said it, is like
Focus
focus.
is the new IQ.
Yeah, which is, by the way, the last interview I just did, this guy's, you should go listen to it. This guy AJ Keller they've built this it's effectively, they call it a crown. It's effectively an EEG that you can wear on your head, and it's so, you know, reading brainwaves, and they use music and these different things to like produce certain gamma waves and things that they're after that actually it's built for dialing in focus, like going, it's like thumbs up, thumbs down on Pandora, and then eventually it's like, I know what you like. It's like, we know what tones get your brain into that state. And so they've got it to where you like pop this on. He's like 5 minutes. He's like, I got severe ADD. I popped this on, 5 minutes of that set aside, and I can go 6 straight hours of a task that I normally can't pay 6 minutes of attention to. Like for some of the work that, you know, I got to do spreadsheets or whatever. He's like, things that I'm like really not built to do. And I was just really fascinated by this, like, and I mean, similar to wearables like VR, it's just interesting the way we're kind of using this technology to continue to like advance our ability. You know, it's an evolution, both of us as mankind, but then also just as we're like learning to use tools, better tools, and we build those tools, and then they kind of build us in return, like in relationship, both to the tools we use and the work we do and the ends we pursue. But back to that focus piece, because I'm like, you know, as someone who is, you know, can pay attention to a million things at the same time. And, you know, people talk a lot about ADHD and like an inability to focus. And like, part of me is like, yeah, that totally makes sense. But then at the same time, I'm like, but just at the level of like paying attention, right? Like what, you know, we walk into a space, do we see what there is to be grateful for or what there is to be upset about? Some of that's just temperamental, but I don't know, like from your own experience of the role of attention, because I think attention brings a little more to it than focus, although I think it's exactly what we're talking about. So talk to me a little bit about that, like as ability, but then as like something governed, because I do think that's the thing invested.
So I like that you introduced the word attention. I think being able to pay attention is actually a contrarian play in today's era, because if you think about it, the largest companies in the world day trade attention.
Yes, that's right.
Right. So social media is essentially day trading attention. Folks who are optimizing for social media are day trading attention. So if you have this marketing device in your hand on a regular basis,
which we all do,
getting notifications, right? Those things break your ability to sustain focus. And so you have all of these entities in our world that are day trading your attention, taking you away from your own agenda and moving you to someone else's agenda. And so I think the power of attention or focus is that you are able to stay on your agenda. You're able to actualize, you're able to, really contribute in a meaningful way, in a way that you're bought into, and a way that you're proud of. And I think if you're all too often on other people's agenda, it can be a slippery slope for feeding yourself and taking care of your own needs.
So as you point that out and you kind of hold a phone up and say these notifications that are like breaking our ability to focus or pay attention to the thing that we are trying to pay attention to, it occurs to me that a lot of, and I imagine even like as you talk about using technology and VR and things like that, I think a lot of people's like pushback on the use of tech is actually the use of tech. So like, well, how is this not going to be more of the same? And I see you kind of go, yes, that's happening. So just respond.
Oh my goodness. It's exactly why, so I think the secret sauce in what we're doing is that we have, in 1994, you had 4 million people on the internet. Today, you have 4 billion people on the internet. Okay. 4 billion people. No one has taught us how to behave on the internet. No one has taught us how to behave. We have, our internet diets are out of control. The things that are being consumed. I have a whole crazy theory about, just the internet as a speakeasy for language, where we can say anything we want, we can be anything we want. And so there needs to be an entity that's going to own that civic virtue virtually, that's going to create parameters and teach children how to optimize human flourishing in the metaverse. There needs to be someone owning that. That's part of what is driving me here. That means that what happens when the headset comes off is just as important as when the headset is on.
Yeah.
And that means that human relationships outside of virtual reality are even more important than human relationships inside of virtual reality. If we're doing this correctly, if my dream comes to fruition, people will more appreciate our natural world. And they will be inspired to take the headset off if they're in a coral reef and actually dive in a coral reef. They'll be inspired to go see the Northern Lights. St. Augustine said, the world is a novel. If you stay in one place, you've only read one chapter. This is a way to expose kids to a world that hopefully they will value more. And so there's some things that we do to make that possible. Like, we're controlling all of the content virtually. So kids are not able to access browsers. They're not able to access other apps. They're only going to be using Optima Classical Academy content. So if they want a game, parents would have to buy them a separate headset.
So the headset is actually like locked.
That's right. We are.
So you're issuing these headsets like a textbook.
It's all tuition free. That is exactly right. It's completely tuition free. These are free public school opportunities for kids. They're mailed a headset to their home, and we are controlling what's happening remotely. And so they're just using our educational platform. So we really use this in a very serious way for school. And so because of that, they're not going to just stay on this headset because there's no other thing to do but school. And so our hope is that when they get done with the school part, they will do what we have done, which is go outside and play, read a great book, hang out with their family, friends, go to church, go to soccer, go to football practice, do the things that make us more human. And we want to be able to model that. We want to be able to reintroduce parents to a lifestyle that puts their time back at the center, with their child back at the center. So we want to make learning more efficient so you can get back to what it is that makes you more human, which is those relationships.
Man, I'm so excited about this. So if people are as excited listening, going, it's weird. Like, part of me is like, I want to go back to school. Can I sign up? So what are the rules around it? Can John come? Or how do people engage or get? If
you live anywhere in the state of Florida, you got a Florida address, and you are a Florida resident, and you're entering 3rd through 8th grade, we will be opening this fall. You can enroll now at www.optimaclassical.org. We are so excited to be able to offer this for free all over the state, and we expect to be able to expand beyond the state of Florida, in the fall. Hopefully.
Is that accreditation stuff?
No, it's authorization stuff. So we are accredited through Cognia, but the authorization would be going through a state government, a Department of Education for other states, and being authorized to offer our curriculum. We are authorized in the state of Florida, but we are not authorized beyond the state of Florida.
Now, and that's because it's public.
Well, that's right. If we were to
Okay.
offer it privately, we could go global right
You go
away.
everywhere you want tomorrow, right? Just
And if there's enough demand for expats and folks, our military families, we may figure out a way to offer a low cost private option. We want this to be accessible, and so we would really want to be intentional about how it's priced so that so families could afford it if we were to offer it globally, right out
Yeah.
the gate.
Yeah. How's it going with enrollment and like what's it looking like?
Oh my goodness. People are very excited. So one of the things I would encourage everybody to do is we have our classroom in action evenings where people can come in, even if they don't have a headset, they can access through if they wanted to click on the link on our Facebook page, Optima Classical Academy. If they want to click on our Instagram, again, Optima Classical Academy, they're able to join our virtual reality session from their phone, from a desktop, or by far the best experience. If they got an Oculus for the holiday season, they should join in an Oculus headset.
When are they?
They are every evening, Monday through Thursday.
Every evening.
Every evening at 7:30, Monday through Thursday.
Oh, man,
So you can join.
I'm gonna join y'all. Yeah.
And it would be really cool because you probably have played some games, but you haven't had a social VR experience where you're in with 10 other people engaging in conversation like this.
No, in fact, the only thing that I was in with other people, because I've done very little with it. I need someone to show me how to even use the thing. So I put it on and I was like, oh, well, I found someone, there was some game. I signed up for it and it just plopped me in this room and I hear all these kids talking. So they're like, it's a shooter game or whatever, but they're all running around and I can hear them all chatting. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. It's funny. I never played video games. I was never into it. Just didn't. But when COVID hit and everybody's lives were like really upset, I was like, man, you know what's weird is like the gamers are fine. Like they meet where they always met. They do what they always did. They are not having the issues. Like everyone's like, oh, these antisocial gamers. And yet when COVID hit, I'm like, they're the only ones whose social life remained constant. And I got dropped into a game and I wanted out immediately because I was like, I don't know anyone and can they see me and can they hear me? And I didn't know what to go. So no, you're right. I haven't had that experience. It's the closest I had to it. I had a straight up panic attack because I was like, I just felt naked and exposed. Like, I don't know what's happening right now. And I just need to log out of this thing. So there is some social dynamic in it. Because I know you said like the classrooms are like the teacher is at the center. And I imagine there's some presentation component to this, but there is like engagement, like we could talk to each other.
Honestly, I don't know what your time looks like, but if you wanted to conduct some of this interview in the metaverse, I could screencast our classroom to you and you could ask me questions as an avatar and you could see me as my avatar in the screencast.
Okay, so I definitely want to do that. I don't have it with me.
Okay, no worries.
The headset,
no worries.
but like I'm like,
yeah.
Let's do a little addendum or something. Like we'll just set up like a little powwow at some point.
I could run you through maybe like a demo too.
Yeah.
And give you just a quick sense of what this would look like if you would let me share my screen.
Yeah. So podcasts are usually all audio. I'm almost definitely going to just rip this one and put it up on YouTube, which is not where a lot of them get listened to, but I'm going to just go ahead and assume that this one, y'all are probably going to want to dial in on video at this point.
I think it's kind of cool if we decide to do it this way. We'll just
I love it.
See how it goes. Change it up a little bit. I wish, if we had multiple people in, you could be actually interviewing me, but instead what you'll do is just get kind of a demo from our friend Vince here. We'll show you a little something just so you get a sense of what the experience is like. So I'm going to share my screen here momentarily. I'm just setting up my my headset. This is all impromptu, by the way, guys. This is all impromptu.
Now your screen, when you share your screen is mirroring what's going on in that headset. Is that right?
That's right. That's
Okay.
what's going to happen. Yep. And you can see what I'm seeing. Is that right?
Oh, this is the family room where you kind of pop up when I first put
That's
that
right.
on. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
All right, so you're there. You're already seeing that part. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So you get a sense. You're going to get to see our virtual classroom here, John. You may end up having some questions about how we kind of organize, but this is just kind of an exciting thing to be able to see.
So for those of y'all that aren't looking and can just see this, we're kind of in this room. I can't see a lot of at this point, but he's got kind of just a menu, like it was a computer screen or a tablet in front of him where he's just kind of signing in or joining. So it looks like we're now entering in. The screen is gone black.
You're entering the classroom now.
Let's go.
So you are here at the Apollo launch. Can you see what I'm seeing,
We
John?
are right at the base of a rocket. This is the Apollo.
So we had an opportunity to take kids
Wow.
through a science lesson, and I'm starting you here, but if
There is smoke coming out of the top of that. This is like
That's
some
right.
jet or something up there.
That's exactly right. But I'm actually going to do a quick tour with you here, just so you can get a sense of what is possible. And I'm curious if you'll be able to hear my audio. That's what I want to see if we can run
All right.
really quickly. So if you can't, we'll have to make some adjustments to the screen share. But I'm curious if you can hear the audio in the headset. We're headed to the lecture hall.
Hello, and welcome to our demonstration.
Can you hear the audio?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's your mic's probably picking it up from the headset, but it's low, but yes.
Okay, let's see if I can.
I would like to start our demonstration by talking about the platform a little bit and how we are organizing this school. The security of our scholars and teachers is as important to us in this environment as it is in
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
school environment. That's why we've settled on a closed system that only allows our teachers and our scholars to meet in this environment very purposefully. And then also we have another layer of security built on this, as this is an electronic environment, to make sure that folks that are not involved with the school cannot access the school, just like you would do in a normal physical school. So I just wanted to get that out of the way at the beginning here, and now introduce you to what we're able to do in this school environment. Like any school, we have the capability to use a blackboard. So we can have scholars and teachers come up and write on the blackboard. But because this is a virtual three-dimensional school, we don't necessarily need a blackboard to be able to write. For instance, I can come over here and very quickly break out my 3D pen and write my favorite equation in space here. And our students and our teachers have this capability as well, which makes it very handy for group meeting sessions and being able to demonstrate something wherever we happen to be. So I'm going to go take this now and put it where it belongs, up here on the blackboard. The other thing we can do in this environment is use traditional teaching materials such as PowerPoint presentations and videos. So if you'll watch the big screen behind me here, I will demonstrate that now.
By the way, as that loads, guys, he just wrote E = MC² in the air and then drug it over and put it on the board. Here goes the screen. This is a rocket launch video. Looks like something like straight off of the news, right? Like a live footage of an actual rocket launch.
I get a little carried away watching the rockets take off. Sticking with our space theme, let's talk about the other things that we can do in this environment that you can't do in a typical classroom. So let's say we're having a conversation about the inner solar system. While we can use PowerPoint presentations and videos, we can also use interactive 3D models in this environment. Let me show you what that looks like. If you'll watch out in this area over here to your right, you will see a model of the inner solar system come to life. There's the Earth, Venus, the Sun, Mercury, and Mars.
They are flying in the middle of the
Actually
classroom.
grab that and bring
orbiting.
it in closer. Oops, try not to hit you in the head with the planet.
This is so much better than a science class.
You can see the power.
So you can see how engaging this is and how we bring everything to life in here. In fact, if we go down to the molecular level, I can even pull out atoms and molecules and make a bunch of these to share with the class. In fact, one of the things that we do is after we go through the lecture portion of the classroom session, we then take students into a bigger area and allow them to use these 3D elements, these interactive 3D elements, to build things that demonstrate to the teacher that they understood the classroom material. And as you can imagine, that is very exciting for them to have the opportunity to do something like that, like take various atoms and molecules and bring them together as a glucose molecule to demonstrate to us how plants create food.
And that would be the received.
Let me get rid of these.
That's right.
The other thing that we do in this environment is use location as a teaching tool. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you right now. Let's say we're having a conversation about current events and we want to go to some place that's relevant to what we're discussing. We can actually make that happen in this environment. So I'm going to do that with us now. I'm going to have this, this will go dark for a moment and we'll be separated, but then we'll come back together in an additional environment. Okay, so stand by and we'll make that happen next.
I think this is the first time we've done a VR demo on a podcast, John. We're pushing the envelope here.
Yeah. So this is not a big deal, but if you were to do this again, I would say, and I don't know that it'll work, but if you muted your mic while he was talking and turned it on for you to talk, there's a little bit of a double voice that's happening.
We can create any kind of.
If you mute me on the
let me try.
They're being covered in the classes. Location actually becomes part of the teaching tool that we will use to cover this.
Nope. Yeah, I think now you have to unmute. I can't hear any of it now, actually. That didn't work.
Students together.
No worries. No worries.
I turned my headset down.
So we'll make another jump to another location just to allow you to experience that.
We're in the Oval Office.
And then we'll wrap up this little demonstration.
We're sitting at the president's desk in the Oval Office.
We'll be back together.
Man.
Now we're in ancient Pompeii.
So, okay. So this is the thing that I is this like an auditorium? Yeah. Yes. So, I got to see this at the McLaughlin's recently. This is, we're in basically an, I'll shut up, let him talk.
Time travel and go back in time to Pompeii's great theater. Amazing. And use this place as a setting for a Socratic conversation about the great books, ancient history, anything else that we want to cover in such an environment. We have a beautiful day here in Pompeii, but if we prefer something like a night sky, we can certainly have that come into play as well. We'll just go grab ourselves a new sky here. There we go. And we can have a conversation about astronomies in the Pompeii Theater, under the stars, and the Milky Way. So let's take you to one last location, our commons area of the Optima Classical Academy. And we'll hear from the head of school for OCA as he wraps up this little presentation. We'll go dark again and we'll be back together.
So this actually was when we had Jeb Bush in the headset coming to our campus, and right after Jeb will be the head of school.
So
That's
we know
great.
you're a big advocate for school choice. What do you think about this as a school choice?
I think it's a great option for a lot of families that want to stay close to their kids. That, you know, the pandemic has changed the mindset for so many people. And, you know, I got to figure out, Erica will tell me about how much is on campus, how much is at home, how that works.
Yep.
But I think it's fantastic. And I love classical education. So
Yes,
we need a lot more of it.
and in being able to teach it in an environment like this, that's so engaging, you know, for the students, because we've been doing this in other areas quite a bit. And there's been studies done by PricewaterhouseCoopers and others that demonstrate that comprehension retention goes up as high as 45-50% in this environment. Because as you can see, you're completely focused in this environment. There's no distractions. The only thing you're involved with is whatever's happening here in the metaverse.
Yeah. And it's kind of hard to daydream even,
That's right.
which I was really good at school.
That's true.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dan Sturdivant, head of school at Optima Classical Academy, and I want to welcome you to our incredible commons area in the metaverse. I invite you to look around and see all that we've created, areas for student socialization, for student work, breakout sessions, and to build community. I'm so glad you had the chance to explore different areas for our scholars to learn in the metaverse. And I hope you'll continue to reach out and learn more about Optima Classical Academy and the opportunities that we have for an excellent classical education for your scholars. And I hope that you'll apply. Thank you so much.
Man.
So it gives you a little bit of a sense.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible. And I do actually have a couple questions. Well, one, the thing with Jeb Bush there. So for those that couldn't see, there was a handful of people as if they were, you know, he was on tour. I'm assuming those are avatars of other people that are kind of in that live session that got recorded. Right.
That's right.
And yet, you know, they had individual personality. I mean, like Jeb was wearing like a politician, like he was in a suit and it kind of looked like him. And then Dr. I had like labels so you could see their names over them for those that couldn't see. And Dr. Walker, I think it said, toward the back, looks exactly like Walter White on Breaking Bad.
That's
Yeah, I was like, Walter White is there. And he was standing there listening to Jeb Bush. I thought that was kind of incredible. So just like students, right? Or let's say I come in for one of these sessions. How does the avatar stuff work? I mean, and I know that, you know, I've been really paying a lot of attention to the, you know, on things that are happening in like blockchain space. And there's a real like place for avatars. And even as it overlaps with metaverse ideas and some of these like VR type worlds, there's like people are buying outfits. Like there's places you can go to a casino and play cards, but like you can't get into the casino unless you have certain clothes, which are NFTs that people buy and you wear them in. And I've been in things where there's like these plain avatars, but then there's that guy over there who clearly had some ability to get an outfit. How does it work in this space? Clearly it was customizable, but like, is it that because it was Jeb Bush, or like I come in and I want to have my own style?
Yeah.
Or I want to be an animal rather than like, talk to me about what that actually, how it will work or does work.
Yeah. So within the context of the school, we have a dress code, as you know, for our avatars. And there's an expectation that kids will come to class in the frame of mind that they're focused on learning.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually Jeb Bush's avatar. I mean, that was the real Jeb Bush.
He already has that. Yeah.
Right. That was actually the real Jeb Bush. And we built an avatar for him that was custom. And we used AI technology to basically replicate his face through photos that were online.
Incredible.
And so you can really get pretty customizable, especially if you're tethered. If you're untethered, you're experiencing a more low poly avatar. But if you're plugged into a computer that's processing a lot of polygons, you can get pretty photorealistic avatars out there today.
So that's just processing power.
That's just processing power.
which will rapidly get better.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity there. I think you've introduced another really interesting idea, which is the intersection between VR and the blockchain, and being able to mint curriculum, for example, on the blockchain, or storing our monetary energy in the metaverse. Those are all really interesting ideas. That's not where we're focused. Where we're focused is building the best online school, and we happen to believe that delivery is going to be virtual reality.
Yep.
But I think that the use cases for blockchain and AI as it relates to the metaverse change things. If you think about it, Bitcoin was the killer app for blockchain. It brought a whole bunch of value into the space. It allowed people to expand to other coins. It got all of those things moving. I think when you intersect, the blockchain and virtual reality, and you're allowed to trade and create value, store value in the metaverse, I think that just gets a lot more, that promotes a lot more adoption a lot more quickly of the tool.
I mean, it's incredible. And honestly, like I personally, as my own like interest in blockchain and Web3 was just fascination with the tech, and like, and honestly, my interest wasn't, so like I said, I didn't play games. This wasn't, and I'm not that into money, actually. It's just a tool, but like, I'm pretty agnostic about it. I mean, we need it and I'd like to have some and whatever, but like that, I'm not a trader or whatever. But for me, actually, the thing that stood out to me about it was the potential for ownership economy and governance, and like democratic experimentation, like things like decentralized autonomous organizations and things like that. So historically, I talked a bunch of dudes into moving into this. I mean, effectively, it was like a little hippie commune we built. Yeah. Before we ever heard of DAOs, right? And so we like pooled money and we voted on how to use it for projects or neighbors or things like that. And but we had to trust Will, who held all the money, and then when I saw this kind of stuff emerging, I was like, oh, I have believed in this way before I ever heard of it as a technology. But then I was like, I got to learn this. And I have so much catching up to do, because I wasn't a coder. I wasn't a gamer. None of this technologist, none of it. And so I start trying to learn, which turns out it's an ecosystem that pays you to learn. So the more that you learn, the more that you engage, all of a sudden you're getting, you learned about ENS, and now you got airdropped a bunch of really valuable tokens because you utilize this service. And we want to distribute ownership, and governance actually is what was distributed, because we believe it should be controlled by the users, because it's decentralized, and these kind of things start happening. And when I think about education, I think like, well, one, the idea of like earning and learning, that's interesting. But apart from the economy, I just think like documentation, permanent documentation is, I'm a student and I solved this problem, and I now have a certificate that can demonstrate that I, with my unique identifier, solved this particular problem. And so now let's say, I need to, it's like in my mind, like the accreditation of things, where I go, I'm going to fill my wallet with these badges that show what I have accomplished in my education, not because they're valuable, but because when like someone's like, I need someone who can code this, you're like, here are my badges that demonstrate I've done that. Right. And so I know that's not the focus of what you guys are doing, but it's an obvious use case or evolution, right? Of going, I mean, like even your report, like I wish I had my report cards. They were on paper. God only knows where those are. Maybe my mom has them in a file folder somewhere, but I don't have them. I would love to pull it out and show you how many F's I had or whatever. Right. And yet if it was on chain, my great grandchildren could pull it up and be like, yo, great grandpappy was kind of bad at 5th grade or whatever, and I think that's very intriguing in terms of building a CV, let's say.
No, I think you're right. I think there are already folks taking a run at becoming the blockchain for education. I think there's a ton of different use cases. you can take a couple of different looks at this. There'll be, again, I think what's going to stay the same about storing one's monetary energy, what's going to stay the same about, you know, the process of credentialing oneself. There will be a lot that changes, but I would play the contrarian on this one and say, you know, what will stay the same? And I don't know all the answers, but I think that's where the value will be, because everybody will be running to, right? Like
the new shiny,
the gold rush, the people who really made money were selling shovels, you know, they understood what would stay the same. You know, we still need shovels to get gold, right? So, you know, so I for your listeners out there, feel comfortable in who you are and sell shovels.
I love that so much, man. Just the shovels, the picks, the tools with which we're going to use. All right. So the other question that came up when we were in Pompeii, and you know, so I didn't get to experience that because there was a guy there presenting. I did get to experience that environmentally. Like I put the headset on and I'm in Pompeii. And there was nothing going on, but I saw it. But then as he was talking about it, and he's like, well, maybe this is a place we would want to be to talk about these great books, or let's really focus in on the sky and talk about the stars. And what hit me there is the environment, because immediately I'm like, oh, that is a better place to talk about philosophy, because of like it just makes this meaningful. It's in the same way that like on date night the candles will help, the dimming of the lights, like there is environmental features. And so I want to tell you a little story that this is a little lesson from my own work. Just, you know, we work with a lot of folks on the streets. We do a lot with food insecurity. And back in the day, we started this Thursday night dinner we ran for many, many years called The Banquet. And there's a big ministry with huge resources here in town that can provide food, like lots of food to lots of places, but they're not like serving the folks. In fact, the community within which their building was like, you better not have millions of poor people come to this neighborhood to feed them. So they had to do a bit of a decentralized model. So they use partner sites like, hey, John, you guys have a little nonprofit. You can do some insurance paperwork, whatever. Now you come here and you pick up these like containers full of food and you can go serve 125 people over in your neighborhood. And we can now send the food to all these different places. Okay. So that was awesome because we didn't have a lot of resources, but we had people like, we want to do the work and we want to spend, because for us, and this has always been true of the well, it was an excuse to be in a relationship. Well, if we just share some food, like you're hungry and this guy wants to volunteer, but the sleight of hand of all of that is if you just know each other, listen to each other across racial lines, across economic lines, there's mutual benefit and healing that comes out of that. And it's what happened to me. And I want to recreate it for others. Okay. So when we did it, we found a nonprofit that said, hey, you can use this space, this classroom, which was all fluorescent lights. And we pulled out their their round plastic tables and their folding chairs. And we had these big plastic bins called Cambros that we scooped out peas and beans and whatever this big ministry had given us for the night. We didn't have any say over the meal. And then people would come in and they would line up. And it's like any, what you'd picture a soup kitchen. We would scoop out like the peas and whatever on these styrofoam plates. And, at the end, they'd get like a styrofoam cup with like some water, Kool-Aid or whatever we happen to have. And then they would go eat. And we did this for years and it was wonderful. And we made real beautiful relationships. But because of life on the streets, you're dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of addiction issues, right? And so there was constantly fights breaking out. A hostile environment, people, throwing chairs across the room and, whatever. And I would always have to be in there, like trying to break it up and be like, yo, Jim, maybe try again next week, but I'm gonna have to ask you to leave tonight. And just always resist trying to ban people. But then like, yo, you do this every week. We got a real problem here. Just trying to address the behavior, right? The unacceptable behavior that made it in an unsafe environment for everybody that was there. It was like, you're all welcome unless you act the fool, in which case we got to explain to you why you got to bounce. Okay. So, but forever I was like, man, I really wish that there was a lot of stuff I wished, but I wish we had a menu and they could just pick from a menu. That's not happening. I wish that this place was beautiful. And I just kept thinking about, like, you know, people go out to a nice restaurant, the candlelight, the tablecloth, whatever. Well, we actually had a group of women from a pretty well-off church that said, hey, how can we help? And I was like, well, you know what I've always wondered is, like, how cool would it be if we had, so real dishes, first of all, tablecloths, flowers, maitre d', waiters, like not this ugly styrofoam plate and whatever. And just like, you know, we turn off the fluorescent lights and we hang Christmas lights. And I'm actually gonna have a buddy come in and play guitar in the corner. And we did. So what these women did is they broke into teams and they said, well, how many tables you usually go? I was like, I don't know. We have 10 tables, you know, 8 people each. And so they broke into teams and they're like, all right, these 2 women are going to sponsor a table. These 2 women are going to sponsor a table. So all the tables looked different, but they matched. So they got tablecloths that went with, and it was like real silverware. And then they got enough, like, picture like large wine goblets. We just put water in them and glass pitchers for the table. And I mean, it was a beautiful romantic setting. And I was super excited to try it. We moved all of that ugly boxes of food into the back. I told people, hey, I need a few more volunteers because we're going to actually wait tables. We're going to plate the food. They never see it this way. It'll come out. It's going to be beautiful, garnished, whatever. Put a maitre d' at the door. People lined up to get, so the line was at the door to get into this beautiful setting. And people were like, oh my gosh, this is so different. So we started running that. Okay. So what happened? I just was blown away and have never forgotten this lesson. I just watched as these same people with these same addictions and these same mental illnesses came in and said, could you please pass the pepper? And spoke to each other with like respect and dignity, and no chairs flew. And actually we started setting up like one-on-one tables because there were some couples that would come in and we're like, you can have date night over here. And the entire, it was as if there was like a transformation, like a redemptive transformation of the human beings, but like nothing changed as far as I could tell, but everything changed by the environment changing. Okay. Wow. Hopefully that's a good enough setup to go. There's an obvious question here about why does sitting in Pompeii help? Why does being in a Japanese garden help? Why is sometimes I'm in a normal classroom, just like at school, that looks just like it always looked? Why? Talk to me about your thesis around the setting of the table.
Such a tremendous question, and really a lovely story about not only the location, but the human connection. So, when we think about great teaching, teachers matter a lot. And so when I think about great teachers, the teacher themselves is at the center of that learning experience. You often will think in terms of the second teacher being your peers. So who you are with, and you talked, that story highlighted that. The third teacher is the location. So we can learn a lot in terms of empathy and understanding context by actually transforming ourselves through traveling to a location and through a concept in VR called body transfer. So there is a very exciting idea around using virtual reality as an empathy machine. I want to understand what it's like to be homeless in Tampa, right? But I live in North Korea, or I live in Djibouti, or I want to understand what it's like to live in the Nuba Mountains, but I live in Mississippi, right? So one thing is to go to that location. That's the first layer of that empathy. The second layer is to walk a mile in a Nubian person's shoes, right? To actually have their skin complexion, actually move into that space, actually have the same reactions from the state government of Sudan to my identity. So there are really powerful ways in which VR can be an empathy machine. And I think that first phase is place-based learning, or the idea of location-based learning, where you can be in those spaces. Again, I go back to the ancients, right? I go back to St. Augustine talking about the world as a novel, right? Because that was their technology. And if you stay in one place, you've only read one chapter. You know, we talk amongst ourselves internally that it's about teachers and it's about locations. Location. The metaverse will be a repeat of that idea. Location. Locations will be incredibly important. Digital locations will be incredibly important in the metaverse context. So yeah, it's that setting is really powerful. I want to leave the audience with the idea of it as an empathy machine.
I love that. Here's a that, because you referred to books earlier as an empathy machine, and it makes perfect sense. It's a portal that lets you kind of see through the character's eyes, and this puts you in a place where you can experience walking in their shoes, like you said.
That's why VR is not a leap for me for great books curriculum, because they're doing similar things.
Yeah.
Right. The great books and virtual reality are the two premier empathy machines, and they're empathy machines in a way that two-dimensional video isn't. So let me give you an example. When you are capturing 360 video, right? If I were to go to Tampa, go to a community that you pointed me to that might be a significantly underserved community of folks who are homeless, and I were to shoot a two-dimensional video of their experience, I would only capture about 30 degrees of vision. I wouldn't see a wider context, right? If I go there and I plant a 360 video and I walk away, they don't have the barrier of a camera person being in the way, right? And you now capture the entire perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so that tool as an empathy machine is much more difficult to corrupt. That's the great irony, is that the 360-degree view really limits what the media can change and adapt. And so I think it's a really powerful empowerment tool that I see as an inevitability. And I'm excited about the future of this as a way to tell stories.
Man, this is so good. I thinking about this. So you were referring to experience in Nuba Mountains, and Ryan Boyette from Nuba Mountains was recently in Tampa, and he did just that, right? He took a 360 camera over there and put together this kind of. So for those listening, we had a headset at this event that he spoke at, and like he's saying, when you put the headset on, because they had just stuck this 360 camera in the middle of the classroom, and I could choose what I was looking at. Whereas like in film, typically you're like, we're going to look at the teacher, or you're going to look at this. And actually what it makes me think of as you were talking is, magicians are doing sleight of hand. What I need to do is to get you to look here so I can move over here, so that not let the left hand know what the right is doing. But it's about attention and diverting your attention from one thing to another. Whereas in this film, there was some pretty clear things that he was hoping you would pay attention to. In fact, at times he was standing in front of you talking, but I could look at him talking, or I could look behind me, or up at the sky, or I could down at a little bit of the tripod that it was on. Right.
That's right.
And what was really, really interesting to me is nothing can be hidden. At one point, we were in the middle of a classroom with kids. I could look up at this thatch roof that was there, and I actually started trying to look and read this piece of paper that was in this kid's lap. And a really powerful thing that I think was super accidental is, you got to think, like, this is in the middle of Sudan. This is an odd thing to see in general, right? This camera itself is really odd. Much like, actually, I imagine would be to, like, if I've been places where I was like the only white person, right? And I stood in a room full of kids and their eyes were on me and they were whispering and pointing and like I'm an oddity in this environment. Well, so is that camera. And what was really weird is they're live teaching this class and I would look around and the kids cannot look away from it. So like, it wasn't all of them, but they keep looking at it and it gives this powerful experience of like being stared at and snickered about and pointed at, which I actually found to be exactly the same. Like, I'm like, no, that's actually what it's like. It's weird because you might as well have been a foreign object. You're a foreign object. And that's they're curious and their eyes are on you. And it's a little uncomfortable and it's cute. And man, I was like, in terms of the empathy machine that you're talking about, I was like, oh, I was so filled with the like remnant, because I've been in environments where they were similar. And I was like, this is so actually like reality. But it is virtual, right? It's virtual reality. But I mean, man, it was as if I teleported straight there, and like the ability to put you in all of these different places. You know, you talked about St. Augustine saying, well, the world's a novel, and if you don't travel, you've read one chapter or something like that. Well, was it, I think, Max Mueller? And I've always been confused about this, but like there's this quote, he who knows one knows none. And so I was a religious studies major, and it's usually, in my understanding, that's used to refer to religion. If you only know one religion, you actually know no religions because you have no ability for comparative analysis. But I actually think that was emerged from linguistic. This has been true linguistically, where like I barely speak English, right? I don't know other languages. I learned a little bit of Greek for studying like New Testament, whatever. But like, I remember reading a book about linguistics because I'm interested in etymology and linguistics. Like when you brought up the origin of the word school, like that stuff is the most fascinating to me. And I wish I knew all the languages, but I don't. But it was like, I remember this one illustration of this just to drive this home. But there was like this, you know, we say you have your whole future ahead of you and the past is behind you. And then I read that there's this other language. I forget the language, but it would say the past, you have the whole past. You see the past. It's in front of you because you can see it. And the future is behind you. And we are backing into the future because you don't see what's coming. You only see what's behind you. And so the future is behind you and the past is in front of you. And they have this slight difference in linguistic choice that I wouldn't even have realized that we are making had I not encountered another culture, another language. And it's so interesting to hear like the novel piece, but even I feel like Mueller takes it a step further to be like, actually, if you haven't gone somewhere else, you've gone nowhere. And I'd be curious to hear you kind of like respond to that. And then I just want to check in on time, because I know we need to probably wrap up here soon based on when I told you I'd let you go, but
Yeah. No worries. I'm just privileged to be able to spend a little bit of time with you this evening. It gets back to what we said before. I love that idea of perspective and perspective taking. VR is such a powerful tool for that. But I think everyone is focused on, you know, the future. And I think this idea of backing into it gets at the same idea that I offered earlier. What's going to stay the same? Like if you're walking backwards, you need a certain amount of certainty, or it could be a matter of life or death, right? If you imagine walking backwards into the street, right, you need a certain amount of certainty. And so it's another way of me saying to the audience, think in your domain expertise, what will stay the same.
I love that.
And triple down on that, as opposed to trying to figure out what will change, because we're all not, you know, none of us are equipped to really understand how the world will change. If you think about what they imagined the world to be like 100 years ago, you know, they thought that people would ride electric eels through the ocean. You know, I mean, this is really fascinating writings about what people's projections were. Even 60 years ago, people imagined flying cars. Right. So we today are imagining 60 years from now that we're going to plug into a machine and have our brains kind of, together with a machine in the metaverse somewhere. These things seem to be highly unlikely. We also imagine a world in which the computers will take over
Singularity.
Yeah, highly unlikely. But it's all interesting ideas. I wouldn't reject any of these ideas, all within the realm of possibility. But what do we know to be true that others might disagree with us on in the future is a much more interesting idea for me. What's more certain?
So checking in real quick, because this just to me, I'm like, I could just do this forever, but like, how are you? Should we wrap? You want to get?
Yeah, we should wrap in whatever's comfortable for you. I got little people and a wife that I need to attend to.
Okay.
But I'm enjoying this, dude. I would keep going too.
Yeah, so I have round 2 questions for you then, because that just prompted so much about the future. But you got the future running around your house there too, and so
that's right. And I don't want to back into them. I want to hit them.
No. And by the way, the one thing that is just on the what will remain the same, what I was thinking as you were saying that is humans, like human nature, like whether we were living in huts or we have a technologically advanced world, humanity acts like humans.
And to add to that, the most human person wins in the future.
That's right.
So do we create a school system that promotes utility or a school system that promotes humanity?
On that note, that is just such a mic drop to end on. Thank you so much for this time. And guys, the most human person wins. I love it, man. Thank you so much for this. I look forward to round 2 with you for sure.
And I can't wait to break bread when we come down to, I'm in Tampa next Tuesday. I want to see you, brother.
Let's do it. Tell me when. We're there. Let's make it happen.